Hi everyone. Here we go with the second of Bree reading Swan, the book I wrote on Bree when she, over a 10-year period, notes. I kept notes. And what I didn't mention the first time is when I first had this whole pile of typed up notes, the person that offered to put it together and edit it for me was a woman who worked at the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential, who was a writer herself. And she edited it for me the first time. I've had some amazing angels pop in over the years, just, and this is sort of, I'm remembering as I'm reading back through. So here we go. Bree was born on April 2nd, and that first couple of months were spent trying to establish a routine, maintaining the house, keeping myself together, and snatching sleep whenever I could. It was not until June 8th that she slept as long as 6 hours for the first time. I was feeling like a zombie. An incident that happened one night illustrates my mental state, an indication of the stress I was feeling. Bree had awakened at 2 a.m., and I took her into the living room to feed her so I wouldn't disturb her father. I went back to bed. A little later, I awoke in a cold sweat, positive that I had left Bree in the living room alone. Of course I hadn't. She was tucked into her crib by my side of the bed, safe and sound. Relief surged through me as I saw she was there. Stress, you get so out of there. You get so spaced out. There was a period in July when Bree seemed to scream nonstop for 4 days straight. My mom gave me some practical advice. She thought Bree was probably hungry and suggested adding some solid food, like creamy cereal, to her diet. This proved to be my answer. It seemed strange that so small a baby could need such huge quantities of food. Then I was told that her assimilation was poor and food went in and out at a rapid state. She was not getting the necessary nutrient benefits from the food and consequently required larger amounts to survive. When Bree was 2 months old, we finally learned the cause of her problems. A genetics specialist at St. Justin's Hospital said it was called Wolff-Hirschhorn syndrome, also known as 4P- syndrome, which is a lot easier. This meant that a small piece is missing from the short arm of her 4th chromosome. The doctor showed us a medical book with a write-up on this particular condition, which had only been identified in the mid-70s. So it had only been identified in the mid-70s. Bree was born in 1980. The article spoke about a short lifespan, a cry that sounded like a cat's, and a helmet-shaped head. There were only 25 known cases at that time. That's what we were told. In North America, I got a photocopy of the article, but no matter how often I read it, I had difficulty relating it to my Bree. I asked the doctor why it had taken so long to diagnose Bree, and he was at a loss. He said he could have identified the problem within 5 minutes of seeing her, a statement that showed an enormous lack of communication within the hospital, in my estimation. The tests done on Walter and I proved negative, so it was not a question of heredity. The doctor added that there was a 1 in a million chance of this happening. Then he told us to make an appointment to see an eye specialist because Bree's left eye had an off-center pupil. This was the first and only doctor who gave us definite and factual information. At that time, Bree was 2 months old. 2 weeks later, I was told by the eye specialist that she could not make a full examination of the eye unless Bree was put to sleep. That really troubled me. It had taken so long for Bree to start breathing on her own at birth that I was not keen on the idea of subjecting her to an anesthesia unless it was absolutely necessary. The doctor said that it was. Bree could become blind in that eye if nothing was done to correct the problem. I said I would think about it. This was the beginning of where the questioning, thank goodness. Back at home, I contacted Dr. Ramsey, the doctor who had been treating my family's eyes for years. His secretary gave me a hard time, indicated that the doctor was too busy to fit us in. I did something I would never do under normal circumstances. I called him at home. And it's something that I just respect that I wouldn't do. So I called him at home. When he heard my story, he didn't sound happy with his secretary. He referred me to Dr. Little, a specialist at the Montreal Children's Hospital. Dr. Little took 2 hours to examine Bree without anesthesia. Over the next few years, we had many visits there. Every couple of months, there was a doctor to see and an examination to be made. These were all routine procedures. Although we were quite inexperienced, we soon learned what questions to ask and what procedures to dispute. The orthopedic department learned that we did not want Bree to be given x-rays automatically before she was even examined. The therapists were a little taken aback the first time we questioned the necessity. After all, it was routine. We insisted on being given a better reason than that. Surprisingly, they were able to examine Bree at least 99% of the time without need of x-rays. Bree's first year of life involved one medical appointment after another. Walter and I had many emotional adjustments to make. They were the negative reactions of friends and family members, and even present trauma about having a child who was not supposed to live long and who would not lead a normal life. For the short period she would be with us, I searched for anything I could do to help my baby. We tried to live as full a family life as we could. We took Bree everywhere with us. When she was 2 months old, we visited our friends, Barb and Jack Nash in Stowe, Vermont. They, bless them, acted normally with Bree and have continued to do so over the years. There has never been any strain during our visits at their home. These really are the only friends that we knew before Bree was born that acted like we had a baby, that was it, and hey, just amazing. And that's something a mom of a hurt child never forgets. You never forget. You see the subtle behaviors. You start to be able to read, what is authentic and what isn't. So when Bree was 5 months old, we decided to take a vacation for a week in a cabin my family had on the Gaspé Peninsula in the province of Quebec, Canada. My family is from a small town called New Carlisle, and many of my relatives still live there. We wanted the vacation before the start of the ski season when Walter would be busy again. It rained most of the week, yet it felt good to get away from Saint Sever and pretend we were just a regular couple on vacation with our baby. I packed the nutritional reference books, which were my guides, Feeding Your Baby by Louise Lambert Lagasse, and The Complete Guide for Preparing Baby Food at Home by Sue Castle. I had just started Bree on vegetables, and I was also giving her vitamin supplements, C and B6 and brewer's yeast. Of course, her course of vaccinations had also been started. I had been earning a little extra money on the side sewing ski hats, and the $400 a month I made from that paid for our new mortgage. I had an old industrial sewing machine, and Bree grew accustomed to its sound. She loved the sound of the vacuum cleaner. She loves the sound of the vacuum cleaner today, and I feel it's because this is the closest noise she hears that is like that of the old sewing machine. I was yet to read books on the effects of different sounds on healing, and later, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child by Thomas Verdi, which describes how the baby in the womb is very much aware of the sounds from 3 months gestation on. If I had known about that during my pregnancy, I would have been listening to classical music and reading inspirational books aloud instead of working on an industrial sewing machine. Yeah, there's so much I learned after the fact, but you do the best you can. But that pregnancy, no matter what, it's such an important time to have calm and meditate and nurture your child with positive stuff because they can hear it. Don't argue in front of your child, things like that. It was during November that I noticed something that frightened me very much. Bree seemed to have brief lapses, lasting 1 to 5 seconds. At first, I thought it might be my imagination. I watched her like a hawk. By December, I knew it was not a figment of my imagination. I was sure she was having seizures, even though I'd never seen one. There is a myth about mothers that says they don't admit to what they don't want to see. This totally is incorrect. It is usually the mother who tells the doctor something is wrong with her child when the doctor continues to state that everything is fine. Most mothers are honest about what is happening to their child. I insisted something was decidedly wrong. An EKG at the Children's Hospital proved I was right. Bree was having seizures. It was decided to hold back on drugs to see what might develop. The doctor said that Bree was severely brain damaged and had little chance of living beyond the age of 5. An appointment was made with the head of the neurology department. The doctor, a woman, was a disappointment to me. I had hoped for a womanly compassion and understanding, but she was cold and reserved. She said Bree would not be able to move, would be a vegetable, and would be lucky to live to the age of 5. Nonetheless, she did not need to be hospitalized yet. Oh, I was devastated. I went home and cried for 3 days. After crying myself out, I resolved to prove the woman wrong. She had used the word hospitalization, but what she had meant was permanent institutionalized care. Well, there was no way anyone was going to put my child away. My meeting with that doctor fueled my burning desire for information and answers, and all my spare time was spent looking for alternatives. Got to realize there was no computer, at least not home computers, and there was no Google, there was nothing like that. I had to read and read and read and read to find all the things I did find for Bree. During my search, I discovered a library in Montreal, and it was called, I mentioned this earlier in the previous video, the Mentally Retarded Association Library. And I borrowed all their books that seemed to indicate there were possibilities other than institutionalization. Many books were written about Down syndrome children and outlined stimulation methods. I read through them all. In the meantime, Walter was trying to make his own adjustments. So now this is going to be a bit Walter speaking. This is what he wrote himself. Friends with children had told me they grew up before they knew it. 1 minute they're in diapers and the next they're off to kindergarten. Well, this was not the case with Bree. At 1 year, she weighed only 13 pounds and a pillow was large enough for her mattress. She made a few sounds, could not speak, and had no mobility. I began to realize how far behind she was falling. Each day, watching helplessly while Bree lay there, unable to do the simplest things that babies do, was the hardest thing of all. I think if only she would move about, show some interest in her surroundings, do something. I found myself praying that God would do something. If, as the neurologist at the Children's Hospital said, she was not going to live more than 5 years, then I wish she would quietly slip away now. To avoid the suffering I imagined she was undergoing. If, however, she was going to live beyond that, then I wanted a miracle, an instant cure. What other prayers were there? Why would I think that dying would be better for Bree than the life she was living? Would she really be a vegetable? I don't know. I was filled with frustration. These are his words. It's his honesty. I was just so focused on keeping her alive. I was just driven. When I look back at pictures, I was just driven. I was going to somehow extend my daughter's life, keep her alive. Now this is me again. Bree's progress was slow. She started raising her head at 6 months and was doing some minor rolling on her first birthday. It was easier for me to deal with her daily care and a busy home life than with the negative reactions of some friends. Many who had spent a lot of time with us prior to her birth now didn't darken our door. It was difficult to deal with this change in attitude. I tried from the start to be open and honest about Bree, but many didn't want to hear because they did not know how to react. They chose to stay away. This had one advantage. It showed us who our true friends were. There is nothing like a hard situation to bring out the best in some people or the worst in others. The deflection of friends was harder for Walter than for me. I was a newcomer to the area, but he had grown up there, and these were his friends from childhood. I had longtime friends who reacted positively to Bree, and new ones who had adverse feelings fell by the wayside and were not missed. My own emotional and spiritual life started to grow in leaps and bounds after Bree's birth. I didn't realize this at the time. I simply felt tremendous pain. The happiest event in my life had just occurred, and yet it hurt so much. Alone at night, I spent a great deal of time in what I suppose could be called prayer. I was talking to God out of desperation. There was no one else to listen. What was I to do? How could I handle this situation? What had I done wrong? I had made mistakes, but yet nothing could merit Bree's being hurt like this. Why was God punishing me? I went over my life again and again. After years of feeling separated from God, I became acquainted with Him out of necessity. There were nights of fear and anger. I was very angry with God for letting this happen to our child. Then, through all the tears and anger, through all the frustrations and questions, there began a very slow spiritual awakening. I had been brought up as a strict Presbyterian. God was to be feared. I remember my mom saying things like this: God will strike you down if you say darn. My father was very good at quoting the scriptures, though his everyday language was punctuated with JC this and JC that, not used in any form of praise. I was forced to attend church. My upbringing was not designed to teach me to love God, but to fear Him. As I grew older, that didn't make sense. When one looks around the world and the universe and beyond, it is hard to believe all that happens is just an accident. There has to be a reason for things, even a brain-injured child. It couldn't be one chance in a million. There had to be a reason why Bree chose us for her parents. The world would work perfectly if man did not interfere. All answers had to be out there somewhere. My first reaction was that I was being punished, which was natural. It was natural enough in light of my upbringing. Fortunately, after Bree's first year, God and I came to a sort of agreement. Not that one can make deals with God. I know, because I've tried every angle. But we struck this bargain. Please show me how to help Bree get well. Put people I need to help us and the information I need to know on my path, and I will do the work, as I am not afraid of hard work. This route was the only one for me to follow, the only one that offered hope. The ideal, of course, would be for Bree to be healed instantly. End of story. But that would mean that we had learned nothing. I believe a brain-injured child is born into a family because there is healing needed in the whole family. This includes parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, cousins, everyone. And, as the years go on, I see that more and more. I mean, when I was 17, I was searching and things didn't make sense. And I didn't want to just push papers around on a desk. And I wanted a purpose. I wanted to do something of meaning in the world. And so putting Bree in an institution was never an option for me. This child was part of me. She was family. We were the only ones who loved her enough to make sure she had the proper care. I tremble when I think of all the babies and little children who are sent off to an institution because they do not live up to their parents' expectations. I pity the parents who think it is a disgrace to have a child who is not normal, our idea of normal. I grieve for the children who are imprisoned and doomed simply because their parents lack the sense of humanity which would enable them to realize the gift they'd been given. Jesus said, how you treat the least of my brethren, you treat me. And, you know, that's so true. I mean, you know, I saw some documentaries of institutions where, you know, kids, because they didn't behave normal in the supposed normal, you know, normal's not necessarily that healthy. They were put away in an institution and left, abandoned, and then abused there. I mean, I can't even go there. It's so horrendous. It's just how many beautiful souls, you know. Oh. Many were the nights I spent crying and praying, wondering if I was on the right track, doing the right thing for Bree. I felt so alone, and my biggest concern was I might not be caring for her in the right way and that she would die. Sometimes I received help from unexpected places. An example is the time I started giving Bree vitamins. A doctor scared me by suggesting I needed to be careful as the vitamins might be dangerous. Yeah, old school. Then later on I realized doctors don't even study nutrition. Might be bad for her. I may have known more about nutrition than he did, yet it raised doubts in my mind, and that night I prayed for an answer of some sort. The next day I had a call from a woman who had been referred to me by someone at the Mentally Retarded Association, because that's what it was called. She gave me some information about a stimulation program for Bree. She mentioned that she was giving her daughter vitamins, which had helped her. Instantly, I had known it was the correct thing. Instinctively, I had known it was the correct thing to do. All I needed was assurance to follow my instincts. I was to learn that few doctors at that time knew much about nutrition, and that only 30 of the 125 medical schools in the United States offered courses in nutrition. These courses were optional and were only 3 hours long. So I've spent 4 decades studying about nutrition. I'm still studying about it. I still need to learn. Things I've learned in the last, 5 years since Bree left. She could still be here. I'm constantly learning, but I'm sharing. Maternal intuition and my strong desire to do what was best for Bree stood me in a good stead as I kept up my search for information. When I discovered something useful, it would sound right, feel right, and look right. I learned to create a positive attitude towards Bree. Attitude, I'm sure, plays a huge part, not only in survival, but in winning. One of my main frustrations at the time was caused by Bree's seizures because they made me feel so helpless. I knew very little about seizures, and I was afraid one might cause her death. The fear was increased by my doctor's comment that prolonged seizures can cause further brain damage and even death. Bree had 4-hour-long seizures. Sometimes I hear people talking about, my daughter had like a 5-minute seizure. I'm going, a 5-minute seizure is nothing. It's nothing. The last seizure Bree ever had, which was 4 hours, I was alone with my mother, and I brought her out of it with the things I knew at that point. And I brought her out of it at home alone because the time previous to that, the doctors almost killed her by over-medicating her. So it's really, it's really a balance of, the more knowledge you have, the better off you are, for sure. Trying to live as a normal life as possible was difficult. Small events like birthday parties were hard for me. Bree would lie immobile on a rug while other children swarmed all over the place. I wondered whether the other parents realized how easy parenthood was for them. I also wondered if they would ever get the chance to know what unconditional love was. Taking pictures, even family, had an album. Every family had an album of memories. Have you any idea how difficult it is to photograph a brain-injured child so she would look as normal as possible? I would prop Bree up on a pillow, make sure her mouth was closed, check that her eyes were wide open so she didn't have the glazed look of a brain-injured child. Many of the pictures I could not bear to keep because she looked so hurt in them, despite my efforts. It was rare that I saw Bree as she looked to others, but those pictures showed me how injured she really was. To me, she was and is beautiful. And as I go through, there's some of my favorite pictures. They're black and white, so you can't see them. This is one with her dad and myself and Bree. It's a great picture. This is with me and Bree on the beach. This one too. She was 5 months old. Those are some of my favorites. Those good memories. Chapter 4. 6 months after Bree's birth, I had an IUD inserted, but something during the spring of 1981, sometime, I missed my period and panic set in. Caring for Bree plus my other duties took all my energy, and I was barely able to cope. How could I manage with another baby? I felt there was no way I could handle that situation. Another concern, if I was pregnant, what had happened to the IUD? Floating around somewhere inside of me? Walter's reaction was immediate and unemotional. If I was pregnant, then an abortion was the obvious solution. Indeed, I was pregnant. The doctor could not find the IUD, but the x-ray did. I had visions of it becoming embedded in the embryo's head, causing another brain-injured child. The doctor was as calm about it as Walter. Of course, there was no alternative but an abortion. I knew that Bree needed 100% of my attention, so it seemed that abortion was the only solution. I was torn in two, and that casual attitude of other mothers at the clinic surprised me. It seemed that some of them used abortion as a form of birth control. On my part, the feeling of guilt was tremendous. I wanted to have more children, and if the circumstances had been otherwise, I would have been ecstatic over this second pregnancy. Weeks passed, I was still bleeding, and the IUD was still inside. The doctor performed a D&C, and the IUD was finally removed. It had been embedded in tissue up against the wall of my uterus. Afterwards, the doctor told me that it would have never been a healthy pregnancy. I would have had a miscarriage or a serious infection. Another pregnancy test came back negative. Walter started talking about a vasectomy, but I was opposed to that. I still wanted children later on when Bree was stronger, and hoped he would forget the vasectomy idea. Walter soon had something else to think about. In the spring, he heard about a ski school for sale, and he fancied the idea of purchasing it. His reason was that I could run the business and from home, and he could help when he wasn't working as a ski instructor at Mont Saint-Sauveur. I was reluctant to consider it. I saw it as taking time away from Bree just when I was looking into a stimulation program that demanded a 2-year commitment for 7 days a week. Seeing it as the answer to our financial problems, Walter became insistent, and I gave up opposing him, and it was taking too much energy. In the meantime, we headed for Gaspé for a 2-week vacation. Cousins who lived there had a positive attitude towards Bree, and this was very supportive. Walter spent every day windsurfing. My parents arrived towards the end of the 2nd week, and then I was able to really relax. One night, we had a picnic on the beach. I wrapped Bree in a large blanket so she could see her first bonfire. Mom held her, and her eyes were the size of quarters as she took in all the action. Bree had never been baptized, and I planned to have this done in Nicolau, where we'd be surrounded by relatives. Walter was not interested in participating in religious rituals, and so was indifferent about having the baptism. But it was important to me, a sort of recognition of Bree. My Aunt Marg loaned me the christening gown my grandmother Annette had made and used for all her children. Bree would be the first child to use the new christening font in the church. The congregation at the church in Nicolau had diminished and was so small there was no longer a resident minister. Usually student ministers took the services. But by good fortune, a minister who had preached there 3 years earlier was on vacation, and he agreed to conduct the service. I had asked if it was acceptable for only one parent to stand up with the child, as Walter indicated he did not want to be involved. At the last minute, he decided to come along. I left it up to him whether he participated in the ceremony or not. There was only a few people there other than relatives, and once more, at the last minute, Walter decided to stand up in front of the church with Bree and myself. It was a great relief for me to have the ceremony performed. Bree looked so beautiful, little princess in a white lace dress. Although she was over a year old, the dress was made for a 3-month-old baby, and it fit her. We returned home refreshed, ready to face the work involved in the ski school. Bree had her measles shot, and 1 week later, she had her first grand mal seizure. A long journal entry said it all. A terrible night. I still fear and feel uncomfortable writing about it. So here we are. I'm writing about that first. Oh, so scary. Bree had her own little room adjacent to ours with a connecting door. At about 4 in the morning, I sensed that her breathing was odd, and I went to check on her. I'd never seen a grand mal seizure before, but instantly knew what it was. We had been warned that if it ever occurred, we should get to the hospital as quickly as possible. The implied dangers of a prolonged seizure were further brain damage and the possibility of death. I don't remember much about the night other than driving to Montreal at an unearthly speed. At the hospital, Walter stayed with Bree. I paced the corridor for hours, praying. That was to be our pattern for over the next few years. Walter would stay in the emergency room, keeping an eye on the doctors. I could not bear to watch Bree shaking out of control, staring into space, and being injected with drugs. I was scared to death. I prayed, I begged, I pleaded. I don't remember what bargains I tried to make with God, but I am sure I promised anything and everything. It was 4 long hours before Bree stabilized and came back to us. Scary, very scary. And you feel totally out of control. You feel you have no control. You know, this is just something that, The first time we stayed in the hospital 3 days while tests were made and a drug program commenced. Then Walter went back home and I stayed on, planning to sleep in a rocking chair beside Bree's bed. My brother Garth persuaded me to go to his apartment for the night. The next morning I was back in the hospital at 6:30 and found Bree awake. That decided the future. I would not be leaving her again because I didn't want for her to wake up to strangers in a strange place. I learned a lot from that hospital stay. When Bree was sleeping, I would wander around the neurology ward. I learned that a hospital was no place to leave a brain-injured child if you wanted her to have the best care. There were children left in wet and soiled diapers for hours because the busy nurses didn't get around to changing them. There were some impatient nurses who easily lost their temper with these children because a child might hate to have a tube put down its throat into its stomach. Off a seldom used corridor was a small back room, and curiosity made me look in one day. 5 beds, each occupied by a motionless form, were in this airy, quiet room. The only nurse who seemed to be looking after these children was a beautiful older black woman who told me that other nurses did not want to deal with the children in this room. She had been a nurse for 19 years, and it was obvious that this was a vocation for her, not just a job. One of the children had had a strong reaction to a measles shot and was less severely brain injured. His father had visited him once, saw what he was like, and never returned. The boy was now 12 years old, unwanted and unloved because he did not meet his parents' expectations. So I got to see a lot off visiting. The nurse admitted that she should not be telling me these things, but she obviously needed to get them off her chest, and she could see how I felt about Bree, and that I was the only parent who was there 100% of the time. She confirmed that I had already seen what I had already seen, which was that busy nurses didn't always get around to attending to children, and in some cases, a nurse's patient wasn't equal to what was required in a hospital setting. She herself would change those children when she could spare the time from her other duties. I question what makes parents' time so valuable they cannot spare some time for their own children, left alone and waiting to die. These children were given to them for a reason. I firmly believe there are no accidents or unlucky events. It's as though God offers these parents a gift, the most precious gift they could have, and they reply by either saying, "Sorry, I don't have the time," or "Give me another gift." I do not like this one. This reaction is like that of spoiled children who believe that the world owes them a living and that they owe nothing in return. They fail to realize that there are no guarantees. That was you sent out. that what you send out will be returned to you. Actually, the only guarantee is that there are no guarantees. Thomas Jefferson said, I tremble for all my species when I reflect that God is just. I tremble for all parents who, over the years, have rejected their brain-injured children. These parents were given the job of caregivers and had the opportunity to love unconditionally, but they turned their backs on their children. God does not make mistakes. We make them. I know of people who dote on their dogs and cats, leaving pages of instructions when they go on vacation, and yet the idea of spending some time with a beautiful little brain-injured child appalls them. Once again, I repeat, how you treat the least of my brethren, you treat me. And that is so, when Thomas Jefferson said, I tremble for all the species that when I reflect that God is just. So I'm going to end this one here. So much phenomenal learning from Bree. And, this is such a reminder of me and to me. And of course, I wanted to read a lot of this so you realize that, I was going through very human reactions, emotions. When you're highly stressed, it's very difficult to make a decision. It's very difficult to, so not only was I driven, how do I save the life of my baby? How do I keep my baby alive? And what's going to happen? Then there were financial issues, and how am I going to pay for this? And but I must admit, I'm grateful for my parents. My dad, because he didn't know, he just kept saying she'd grow out of it. But my mom was mainly afraid for me. She was really afraid for her baby, because but she loved Bree just like she was. She wanted her to be, healed, and but she loved her. I know other people that literally, I've known people that wouldn't come into where Bree and I were living because Bree was a hurt child. They wouldn't come in the house. So, but those were the people that doted on their dogs, but not a human being. And because I believe, I'm vegan for now at my point in life for a reason, because animals have a central nervous system like us. They have feelings. And also I think from this is that I could be Bree. You could have been Bree. Any one of us. I don't know if we live a lot of lifetimes, but if we do, we've probably been a hurt child in one of them. And, put in good. I mean, I've seen, when I've ever been angry in my life is because I'm so exhausted. I'm so scared. I can't see straight. That's when I've seen anger in me, is I'm so afraid I can't see straight. So, we are responsible, so, and Bree taught me all this. God, even just reading this and reflecting is how much a little girl who didn't talk, who didn't walk, she did get to the point of walking with age. She did get there. Taught how much, what a teacher. So, I really believe the greatest teachers don't say a word. Their existence, their being, that's what it was with Bree. So thank you so much. I'm going to plow through this. We'll see if I get to the end. Some way or another, I think I should, because this only goes up to 22 years. And it really, for those that are interested, want you to, understand my daughter, Bree, and what a beautiful soul she was. And also, me as a caregiver, I was just trying to figure it out and survive and, make sure my daughter was okay, because you know what? had a really deep feeling that if something happened to me, no one would care for her. And I'd say I'm 100% sure of that. You know, if something had happened to me, they would have put her away in one of those institutions. And you know, I was gifted with staying and seeing what happens in hospitals after hours. So thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for being interested in caring about my beauty girl. And April is her birth month, so I'm going to continue this through April. Thank you.